I was halfway through fixing the hinges on my old red barn doors when I heard the unmistakable shriek of Gretchen Calloway cutting across the field like a rusty nail on glass. "You're in violation again, Walter," she shouted, marching up in her pastel visor and clipboard like she owned the place. I wiped my hands on my jeans and turned to face her. "Gretchen, it's a barn. It's been here since 1974. What code am I breaking now?" "Section 5C of the HOA guidelines," she snapped, flipping through her binder like it was the Constitution. "Structures must be visibly harmonious with community standards. That barn is an eyesore." I just stared. "You mean the barn on my 5-acre property, 100 feet from the road, is somehow hurting your HOA-approved aesthetic?" She didn't even blink. "You've been warned. I gave you 30 days to paint it and replace the windows. Time's up." I folded my arms. "And if I don't?" Her eyes lit up with that smug little glint I'd come to despise. "Then we fine you. Daily. And if you don't pay, we lien the property." Now here's the kicker. I never even signed into this HOA. The association was created last year by a group of bored retirees on the southern end of the neighborhood. They redrew the district lines and voted us in without consent. I'd been fighting them legally for months. I didn't back down, just said, "I'll see you in court." Again. She turned on her heel and stormed off, but something about the way she glanced back at the barn made my gut twist. I didn't trust her for a second. That night, I installed 2 motion-activated floodlights and a new set of security cameras, one facing the barn door, the other covering the side windows. I wasn't about to let Gretchen or one of her little HOA minions sneak around. 2 nights later, around 2 in the morning, I woke to the sound of glass shattering. I grabbed my coat and bolted outside with my flashlight. The left side of the barn looked like a war zone. 3 of the large, antique windows had been shattered, glass everywhere, one of my sawhorses knocked over, and tire tracks in the muddy grass leading right back to the road. I checked the cameras. And there she was. Clear as a bell. Gretchen Calloway wearing a hoodie and gloves, tossing a brick straight through the middle window with the grace of a drunk raccoon. She looked around, then lobbed a second one through the next pane. Then she flicked off the exterior light and jogged back to her silver Lexus. I stood there in the cold, watching the footage again, heart pounding. I wasn't just dealing with HOA nonsense anymore. This was destruction of property. And I had her dead to rights. By sunrise, I was at the county sheriff's office with a thumb drive in my breast pocket and a folder of printed stills from the footage. The deputy on the front desk, a wiry guy named McClellan I'd seen around town before, took one look at the broken glass in the photos and raised his eyebrows. "Could you tick off this bad, Walter?" I handed him the drive. "You'll want to watch the footage before I answer that." He called in Sergeant Harper, who pulled me into a back room with a small monitor and plugged in the drive. The second he saw Gretchen's face on the screen, his eyes narrowed. "You're telling me this woman lives in your neighborhood?" "She's the head of that rogue HOA I told the county clerk about last fall." Harper didn't speak again until the video finished. Then he sat back, crossed his arms, and let out a low breath. "That's felony-level vandalism. She brought tools, wore gloves, and targeted specific windows. This wasn't random mischief. She's been threatening liens over nonsense violations," I said. "I told her she didn't have the legal authority to enforce anything on my land. Now she's escalating." Harper nodded slowly, then stood. "We're filing this under criminal mischief with intent to damage private property, possibly trespassing with malicious intent. You'll need to sign a statement. We'll handle the rest." 2 hours later, Gretchen Calloway was pulled over on her way to the golf course. The arrest made local news before I even got back home. By noon, my phone was buzzing with messages from neighbors, some congratulating me, others cautiously asking what had really happened. I didn't say much. I just posted one of the security stills of Gretchen mid-throw on our neighborhood forum with the caption, "HOA leadership lesson of the day, don't bring bricks to a legal fight." By mid-afternoon, the forum exploded. Turns out Gretchen hadn't just been harassing me. She'd fined a retired Army mechanic named Bert for flying a slightly faded American flag. She'd cited a mother of 3 for leaving a stroller on her porch overnight. and she tried to force a new couple to resod their yard with a specific brand of grass only sold by her nephew's landscaping company. Now that someone had finally exposed her with hard evidence, people were furious. That evening, I got a knock on the door. It was Sheriff Harper and a woman in a navy blazer with a badge clipped to her belt, Detective Marla Reyes from the county prosecutor's office. "We need to ask a few more questions," she said. "Gretchen's lawyer is trying to argue the footage was edited. Any chance you've got the original files from the system?" I brought them inside and showed them the DVR unit tucked under my workbench, still running. Reyes flipped through the interface like she'd done it 100 times, confirmed the timestamps, and nodded. "This is better than we expected," she said. "She's claiming she was home asleep, but this footage has GPS timestamps and matches weather data from that night. It holds up." I looked at Harper. "So what happens next?" "She's being charged. Might even face jail time if the judge decides to make an example out of her. But the real bombshell's what we found during the search warrant." Reyes glanced at Harper as if deciding how much to share. Then she said, "We found a folder on her home computer labeled Enforcement Strategy. It had a spreadsheet listing property addresses, estimated values, and notes about which homes could flip clean if the owners defaulted on fines." I blinked. "You're saying she was targeting properties to take over?" "She was trying to force fines until people either paid up or gave up. Then she'd push liens through the HOA and resell the homes through a shell LLC run by her brother-in-law." Harper added she already had 2 homes under threat of lien. Yours would have been next. But she needed a few more fake violations to justify it. My jaw clenched. "That's attempted fraud on top of everything else." Reyes nodded. "We're opening a full investigation. If the HOA board knew about this, they could be facing conspiracy charges. We've already frozen the association's operating account." That night, I didn't sleep much. Not out of fear, but because I could feel the tide turning. Something rotten had been festering under the surface of our neighborhood for over a year, and now the whole thing was unraveling. By the next morning, the HOA board was in full retreat. 2 members resigned in a panic. The treasurer, a nervous man named Leland Marks, posted a public apology saying he'd been pressured into silence and was cooperating with authorities. I hadn't even stepped outside when a knock came at the door again, this time from a tall guy in jeans and a Union jacket. He introduced himself as Calvin, one of the original homeowners from the north end of the neighborhood. "We tried to stop this HOA from expanding last year," he said. "They held the vote during a holiday weekend, barely notified anyone, and counted absentee ballots that nobody signed. We didn't have proof. But now," he handed me a folder filled with scanned documents, mismatched signatures, duplicate ballots, and a timeline of how the annexation vote had been pushed through. "If we can prove the vote was fraudulent," he said, "we can nullify the entire expansion. That means you're not under their jurisdiction anymore, and neither are 57 other homes." I felt a grin tug at the corner of my mouth. "Let's take it to the county." We filed a complaint the next day with the Registrar of Deeds and the county legal office. With Gretchen under criminal investigation and the board in shambles, it wasn't hard to get their attention. Within a week, the county issued a temporary suspension of the HOA's authority pending review of the annexation documents. A hearing was set for early the next month. In the meantime, I focused on repairs. Not just the broken windows, but the deeper damage, neighbors who'd stopped speaking to each other, families who'd been harassed into silence, good people who'd nearly lost their homes over lies. I invited folks to my barn for a weekend cookout, no agenda, no speeches. Just food, music, and a chance to reconnect. By the time the sun went down, kids were chasing fireflies across the grass, and 6 people had come up to thank me for standing up. Not because I was special, but because I made it safe for them to speak up too. As I stood near the fire pit, sipping a cider, Calvin came up beside me with a paper plate full of ribs. "You know," he said, "if that county hearing goes our way, we ought to draft a charter. Something that actually protects homeowners instead of threatening them." "No HOA?" I asked. "Nope. Just a community agreement. Voluntary. Transparent. Maybe even run by a rotating committee so no one person gets too much power." I nodded slowly. "I'd be open to that." He looked around the crowd. Funny how fast people come together when the fear's gone. I didn't say anything. Just watched the lights from the barn windows flicker across the field, new glass glinting in the dark, whole again. The damage was real, but so was the repair. And this time we were building something stronger. Together. The county hearing took place in a converted courtroom inside a government annex building that still smelled faintly of printer toner and damp carpet. The walls were lined with faded county maps and plaques commemorating long-retired commissioners. Half the room was filled with neighbors, some curious, some still shaken, others clearly hoping to see the last of the HOA's schemes dismantled for good. I sat near the front beside Calvin and two other neighbors who had joined the effort to challenge the legitimacy of the annexation. None of us wore suits. We didn't need to. What we had was better documents, timelines, footage, and a paper trail that stretched like a noose around the neck of the sham association. A county attorney named Douglas Weller presided over the hearing. He was late 50s, balding, and had the tired eyes of someone who'd read too many contracts in his life but still had enough fire left to care when someone tried to pull a fast one. He opened with a statement that made the room go silent. Due to ongoing criminal investigations involving members of the board, this hearing will proceed independently of any current charges. However, evidence submitted by the district attorney's office will be considered. That was our first break. The county clerk brought up a projector and began reviewing the annexation documents. As the signatures flicked across the screen, Weller frowned. "These two are identical," he said, pointing. "Same name, same signature, same timestamp. How many instances of duplication did your team find?" The clerk cleared her throat. 32, sir. Across 57 properties." That drew a sharp intake of breath from the back row. "Were those signatures verified against the county's voter registry?" "No, sir. The HOA didn't formally request verification." Weller turned slightly in his chair. "And who was responsible for submitting these ballots?" A shaky voice came from the corner of the room. Leland Marks, the former treasurer, stood up, clutching a folder to his chest like a shield. "That would have been Gretchen," he said. "She collected them and submitted the results herself. I just logged them after the fact." Weller nodded once. "Did you witness the vote count?" "No." "She said she'd already tallied them. And you didn't think to double-check?" Leland looked like he wanted to melt through the floor. "She said it was urgent. That if we waited, we'd miss our window to file the expansion with the state." Weller jotted something down on his legal pad, then looked up. "I'm recommending immediate suspension of this annexation. The vote process violated county procedure in multiple areas, including verification, notification, and chain of custody. Additionally, I'll be forwarding this to the state board overseeing homeowner associations to initiate a full audit." Someone in the back clapped once before quickly stopping. The tension in the room shifted. Not relief, not yet, but that first breath after holding it for too long. Later that afternoon, I walked out of the building with Calvin and the others, squinting into the autumn sun. A reporter caught up with us in the parking lot, notepad in hand, camera guy trailing behind her. She asked, "What do you hope comes out of this?" Calvin didn't hesitate. "Accountability, transparency, and the end of weaponized paperwork." I kept walking. 3 days later, the county prosecutor filed expanded charges against Gretchen, falsifying election documents, attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate theft, and malicious destruction of private property. The last one was mine. The local paper ran the story under the headline, "HOA Queenpin faces criminal charges amid neighborhood uprising." Meanwhile, the remaining members of the dissolved board started getting subpoenas. One of them, a retired dentist named Arlo Bishop, tried to claim ignorance. But the emails retrieved from Gretchen's computer told a different story. He had approved the strategy to push fake citations on targeted properties and even suggested which ones might fold quickest. The worst part came when the county unearthed a hidden bank account set up under a fake HOA management LLC that funneled fine money into a private investment fund. Over $75,000 had been siphoned from residents over the past year, and not a dime had gone into community maintenance. The sheriff's department seized the account. The county froze all related assets. And a judge issued an order prohibiting any of the former board members from participating in any registered association until the criminal matter concluded. But the fallout didn't stop there. A young woman named April, who lived 2 streets down from me, came by with a manila envelope and a shaking voice. "I think I have something else," she said. Inside were photos taken from her upstairs window of 2 board members entering my barn the night before the window attack. They didn't break anything. They didn't steal. But they were inside. I took the envelope to Detective Reyes. She looked through the photos, then leaned back in her chair. They were scouting. Most likely trying to find something they could use against you. Unsafe wiring, code violations, anything that would justify a forced inspection. Once they didn't find anything, Gretchen escalated. "Is that enough to charge them? Combined with the emails?" "Absolutely. That's unlawful entry at minimum. And if they were acting under direction from Gretchen, it strengthens the conspiracy case." The next round of charges came with little fanfare. The neighborhood had gone quiet. No more clipboard patrols, no more late-night threats of fines. Instead, people started talking to each other again. One morning, I found a hand-painted sign nailed to the old oak at the entrance of our block. It read, "This neighborhood belongs to its people." No name. No signature. Just a statement. That weekend, Calvin hosted a meeting at the community center. Not a vote. Not a power grab. Just a round table. 17 people showed up, including 2 former board members who wanted to make amends. One of them, a woman named Dana, stood and said, "I let fear make me complicit. I was afraid of being fined, of being ostracized. I signed things I didn't read. I'm sorry." No one shouted her down. No one cheered either. But people listened. We agreed to form a temporary committee, not to govern, but to draft a voluntary charter. The goal was simple. Protect against future abuses, create a transparent way to resolve disputes, and ensure that no one could ever quietly seize power again. I didn't want to be on the committee, but I did offer to draft the legal language. Years ago, I'd done paralegal work for a real estate firm before getting into woodworking full-time. It felt good to dust off those skills for something that mattered. As the weeks passed, the DA's case grew stronger. Witnesses came forward. More documents surfaced. And Gretchen? She stayed quiet. No statements. No apologies. Just a lawyer and a looming trial date. But none of us waited for the verdict to start rebuilding. Bert, the retired mechanic, started offering free flag repairs and pole installations. April began organizing monthly potlucks. And the new couple with the forced sod posted a sign in their yard that read, "No more fake grass, no more fake power." One afternoon, I was repairing a fence post when a county assessor's car pulled into my drive. A woman stepped out and introduced herself as Sharon. She had a clipboard, but her tone was casual. "Just doing follow-ups," she said. "We're checking on properties impacted by the fraudulent citations." She inspected the barn, took a few notes, then paused. "This place has history," she said. I nodded. "Been in my family since '74. You stood your ground." "I had to." She smiled, not the rehearsed kind, but the kind that meant something. "Well, it made a difference. Counties reviewing all future HOA expansions now. Mandatory oversight. Mandatory audits. You set a precedent." I watched her drive off, a strange calm settling in. Later that night, I walked out to the barn. The front window caught the moonlight just right, casting a long beam across the grass. I stood there for a while, hands in my pockets, listening to the wind move through the trees. Not every fight ends with a cheer. Some just end with peace. And that was enough. A thin layer of frost clung to the dead grass the morning Detective Reyes called again. Her voice was sharper this time, urgent but deliberate. "We've uncovered something new in the financials," she said. I listened from the porch, coffee in hand, watching a pair of crows squabble over something shiny in the yard. Worse than the fake fines and the annexation vote? This is different. We found a trust account under Gretchen's name. It's linked to a wire transfer from a contractor that was awarded a non-competitive landscaping contract last spring, same company that was resodding properties after citing them. I leaned against the railing. Let me guess. The contractor's related to someone on the board. Not just related. Her nephew. He used a different surname to avoid connecting the dots. But the money trail's clean. Kickbacks, Walter. The fines weren't just about control, they were revenue streams. She told me to come in the next morning. They wanted me at the formal deposition. Not just as a witness, but as someone who could walk them through the timeline from the homeowner's perspective. The deposition was held in a secured conference room at the district attorney's satellite office. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A court reporter sat to my left, her fingers poised above her machine. Across the table, Assistant DA Heidi Chen adjusted her glasses and nodded for me to begin. Start from the moment you realized the citations weren't just petty, she said. Take your time. I laid it out in full. Not just the vandalism or the footage, but the quiet details, the way Gretchen would show up with fabricated violations, the pressure tactics, how quickly the threat of liens followed non-compliance. I described the moment I realized the annexation had no legal footing and how quickly retaliation followed. Halfway through, Chen leaned forward. Can we establish that you received no community vote notification prior to the expansion? None. Not a letter, not an email. The first I heard of it was when I got a citation for non-compliant structure aesthetic. That was the barn. She nodded. And you're certain the barn predates the HOA by decades? My grandfather built it himself in 1974. The structure's been grandfathered in, legally recorded on the original survey. Reyes slid a folder across the table. In it were 2 notarized affidavits from former HOA board members. Each one admitted knowledge of Gretchen's plan to leverage fake violations into forced fines and then pressure owners into voluntary compliance sales, a sanitized term for what was, essentially, coerced flipping. She had a term for it, Reyes said. Called it equity extraction. Chen's expression didn't change. We'll be adding racketeering to the charges. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. How many properties did she target? 22 in total. 3 were sold under duress. We're working on restitution. The rest stopped short of transfer, but the intent is there. By the end of the deposition, they had enough to move forward with a grand jury indictment. Not just on Gretchen, but on 2 remaining board members and her nephew, whose LLC was being audited as part of a broader fraud investigation. The county had even asked the state to review whether the HOA could be dissolved by judicial order, a rare move, but not unprecedented under circumstances involving criminal enterprise. I drove home that evening under a sky streaked with violet and gold, headlights casting long shadows across the gravel road. The barn stood quiet in the distance, windows intact, the floodlights I'd installed months ago still watching faithfully. The next morning, Calvin stopped by with a copy of the revised charter draft. He'd been working with April and a few others to create something radically different, not a homeowners association, but a neighborhood council without enforcement powers. Voluntary participation. No fines. No authority over property. Just coordination for community events and shared interests. Everyone's tired of being watched, he said, tapping the document. This puts the power back in the hands of the people actually living here. I flipped through the pages. It was clean, simple. No legalese to hide behind, just a framework for neighbors to act like neighbors again. You think people will go for it? I asked. They already are. We've got 30 signatures. No pressure, just support. No one's obligated. I signed it right there on the porch. That weekend, we held what folks started calling the Reclaim Picnic. No schedules, no speakers, just long tables loaded with food, music from someone's Bluetooth speaker, and kids running barefoot through the grass. Dana, the former board member who'd apologized weeks earlier, brought homemade pies and sat with the family she'd once cited for mailbox height. Bert put together a slideshow from the old days of the neighborhood, back when it was just a cluster of homes and barns, before the gates and patrols and bylaws. The final photo was of the barn, taken in '75. My grandfather, arms crossed, standing proud beside it. Someone raised a toast with sweet tea. To old barns and new beginnings. The sound of laughter drifted into the evening air. Then came the trial. It took place in county court, not far from the office where I'd given my deposition. Jury selected. Witnesses summoned. Evidence presented. Gretchen sat at the defense table in a navy blazer 2 sizes too tight, her attorney doing his best to spin it as overzealous community protection. But the jury didn't buy it. Not with the emails. Not with the videos. Not with Leland's testimony, which came with tears and a public apology that left half the courtroom silent. The verdict came in after 4 days, guilty on all counts. Property destruction. Fraud. Falsification of public documents. Conspiracy. Racketeering. Sentencing was swift. Gretchen received 8 years with no possibility of parole for the first 5. The judge called her actions a systematic betrayal of trust executed through manipulation, deceit, and coercion under the guise of civic responsibility. Her nephew was sentenced to 5 years for wire fraud and unlawful business practices. The 2 remaining board members received suspended sentences and community service contingent on their testimony and cooperation. The court ordered full restitution to all impacted homeowners, and the state approved the dissolution of the HOA within a week of the verdict. A week after the sentencing, a county crew removed the sign at the neighborhood entrance that once bore the HOA's name. In its place, someone had planted a dogwood sapling wrapped in a blue ribbon. That night, I walked out to the barn one last time before bed. Not because anything needed fixing. Not because I was expecting trouble. Just because it felt right. The wind rattled the bare branches and the security light clicked on automatically. The barn doors were closed, the windows whole. Not a brick in sight. I leaned against the side of the building, staring up at the stars for a long time. From the corner of my eye, I saw Calvin walking up the road, a thermos in hand. "Thought I might find you out here," he said. "You ever think it'd end like this?" I asked. "Not like this. But I hoped it'd end right." He poured coffee from the thermos into 2 tin mugs. The steam rose in the cold night air. "They're calling it the barn case in legal circles," he said. "DA said it's going to be cited in HOA abuse cases statewide." I raised my mug. "To the barn, then." "To the barn," he echoed. The next morning, I took down the cameras. Left the floodlights, though more for wildlife than anything else now. Life settled back into its natural rhythm. People fixed up their homes not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. We started a tool share program. April organized a composting initiative. Bert offered to teach welding to local teens in his garage. And on the first Saturday of every month, the barn hosted a community supper. No rules. No rosters. Just chairs, food, and stories. The barn had survived bricks, lies, and schemes. Now it stood for something better. Something earned. Something we'd built not with enforcement, but with each other.